Hi students, in this video I'm going to talk a little bit about American involvement in World War II, how the United States came to be involved, came to be a participant in the war. When the war begins, Franklin Roosevelt's approach is to emphasize neutrality to try and stay out of the war as much as possible. This was consistent with foreign policy in the United States since World War I, which had emphasized staying out of the war, staying out of European political affairs as much as possible, even though the United States, now as the greatest economic power in the world, was increasingly involved economically in Europe. And so Roosevelt sets out his platform as neutrality and isolation from this new European war that's developing. And he even tries to ensure this greater neutrality by closing some of the loopholes and some of the practices that had kind of drawn the United States into World War I. And he does this by passing the Neutrality Laws with broad support from Congress. And these laws, among other measures, state that the United States and United States citizens are not allowed to sell weapons to non-belligerents, are not allowed to sell weapons to belligerent nations, those that are fighting in the war, and they are not allowed to sail on non-US ships or ships, passenger liners, for example, that are English or German. And this is two measures to try and keep the United States further removed from the war. Nevertheless, as the war goes on, we start to see Roosevelt's evolution on neutrality. And increasingly he sees Germany and Japan as dangerous and aggressive nations and starts to move the United States closer and closer to a full alliance with Britain and France in opposition to Germany and Japan. After the Nazi invasion of Poland, he now begins to allow Britain and France to purchase weapons from America. So we start to see a change in these neutrality laws. And Roosevelt says American ships aren't going to transport any of these weapons. You have to come get them yourselves. You have to pay for them up front. We're not going to be tied to you in terms of loans that are outstanding, the same way that it happened in World War I. But if you're willing to do this cash and carry system, then we're going to let you buy weapons from us. After the fall of France in 1940, so after a string of German victories, FDR provides Britain with even more support through the Destroyers for Bases Agreement, where the United States is allowed to establish naval bases on British colonies in the Caribbean, and in return they send Britain 50 old warships. This is a sign of the power of the US Navy, that the British want these ships, these older American ships, the desperation of Britain at the time, fearing a German invasion, and that the United States is shifting closer and closer to full alliance with Britain against Germany and against their Axis powers. And it's very much the case that the war gives Roosevelt's presidency a new lease of life. We saw last week with the New Deal how his second term, you start to see coalitions rising up against him or in opposition to him. You start to see that his agenda is struggling. He's struggling to pass his agenda. You also start to see that that the economy that he is trying to rebuild is stagnating and slumping again. The idea, the cause of defeating the evil of Nazism gives him a new lease of energy in his presidency, a new focus to his energy. And he, on the platform of, at least partly on the platform of resistance to the Nazis, he is able to win an unprecedented third term as President of the United States, the only person to have achieved a third term, and then later a fourth term. After he is elected president for the third time, he agrees what's called the Lendlease Agreement. And this is passed through Congress. It gives the president broad powers to determine that he can assist a nation whose interests are aligned with the United States. If it's an American interest to defend a foreign nation, then the president can authorize that, can authorize military aid for that nation. And that's what Roosevelt does for Britain. So it's a huge increase in presidential power that a president can make this type of decision. Not taking the United States to war, but it's the next best thing. And it's something that future presidents can use to wage proxy wars. And so this is a sign of the way in which the Progressive era and then the New Deal and now World War II continue to increase the power of the federal government. It's an important theme, not the only theme by any means, but it's a very important theme of American history in the 20th century. And once the United States enters the war after Pearl Harbor, we see again the growth of the federal government. Just as we saw in World War I, once the United States is at war, there are new powers that are granted to the federal government that align very nicely with the progressive agenda to increase the power of the federal government. This happens again in World War II, in particular in the economic aspects of government. Waging World War II, fighting World War II, cost the United States $3 trillion. And this is paid for by expanding taxation. Before World War II, only about 5% of Americans, the richest 5% of Americans, paid taxes. By the end of the war, 90% of Americans are paying taxes. And so the federal budget is dramatically increased to pay for this war. Federal government becomes consequently more powerful. The president, FDR, is granted war powers similar to Wilson's. They give him a lot of power over industry and jobs, give him a lot of power over the dissemination of information, over the United States while the United States is at war. But what we see is that once these powers are given to the federal government, it's very rare that they get given back. And so this is a way in which American participation in World War II continues this trend of the expansion of the federal government. In other areas, World War II is key to the revival and rebounding of the American economy after the Great Depression. Remember when we looked at the New Deal certainly improves the American economy. But the American economy is still struggling. You still have this situation where 17% of the workforce are unemployed, and the New Deal hasn't managed to solve that. And it's World War II that changes that. Suddenly, many soldiers, many working men are going into the military. Hundreds of thousands of working men are going into the military, are being paid by the government. And then all these industries to do with the war rise up. You have to replace the men who have joined the army. And so you have a whole new wave of jobs and production that's available and that's necessary in the United States that kickstarts the American economy, which is going to be directly linked to the Allies winning the war. But it's also very beneficial for the United States economy that's coming out of this period of depression and stagnation. The World War II also changes some of the dynamics of the workforce, some of the dynamics of American society. Whereas in World War I, we saw a number of women go to work in roles that were traditionally male roles. In World War II, that number is much greater and becomes much more established. And so we have 8 million women now becoming a part of the American workforce. And unlike World War I, a much smaller percentage of those women are going to leave their jobs, going to leave their positions after the war. So female participation out in work and the workforce outside the home is becoming more and more common as a result of World War I, and especially as a result of World War II. All the new jobs that are available, jobs in manufacturing aircraft, in manufacturing tanks, in manufacturing weapons, these are good, well-paying jobs, and there's a constant need for work. And so you start to see people moving out of the poorest part of the South, which was the poorest region in the United States at the time, and moving out of the South to the West Coast, Seattle, Los Angeles, to work for these new industries. And a lot of these people who moved for these new jobs were African Americans. So African Americans, poor whites, those who had been working as sharecroppers, who had this really tenuous economic existence where they were reliant on crops to come in, just kind of to keep turning over. It was very difficult for them to become independent. World War II and all the extra jobs that are associated with World War II make that possible. The last aspect of American involvement in World War II that I want to address in this video is the way that it affects minority groups in American society. We see that Mexican Americans are highly involved in World War II, that there's a huge number of Mexican Americans who are decorated by Congress for bravery, much higher percentage than other populations. We see that Native Americans are fighting and joining the military at a higher rate than the rest of the population. What's fascinating about Native American participation in World War II is that Native Americans are used as what are called code talkers, those who talk over the radio simply because the Germans have no idea, and they're talking in their native languages, and so the Germans have no idea what they're saying. The last minority group to talk about are African Americans. African Americans who were enthusiastic about fighting for the United States, but who initially were not allowed to serve in combat roles. Eventually, because of the need for troops, they are allowed to serve in combat roles, and their bravery in combat wins them a lot of recognition and a lot of acceptance by people who in the past had held more racially stereotyped attitudes. And so by a lot of African American authors at the time, this is seen as a huge step towards fuller integration of African Americans into the society of the United States. And what I wanted to highlight here is that all these minority groups, despite whatever segregation, despite whatever marginalization they experience in American society, very much wanted to fight for the United States. Then even in this situation, they saw themselves as belonging to this country, and they saw themselves as wanting to fight and willing to die for this country.